We will get going in about 30 seconds. All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the second session of our three-part holiday webinar series. My name is Erin Hildreth, and I am part of the responsibility.org team. Before we get started, I want to let you know that we're recording the session today. You heard the little magic voice tell you we're recording. This session will be available on the responsibility.org YouTube page later today, at the very latest, early tomorrow. And we'll send out the links to all three of our webinar sessions after the conclusion of the third session. And the third session is next Thursday, December 16th. But of course, if you need it sooner, we'll be happy to get it to you. Everyone is on mute at this time. If you have a question, please enter it into the question and answer box, which is right next to the comment box. This will allow us to address your questions a little more easily. The mission of responsibility.org is threefold. We work to eliminate underage drinking. We work to eliminate drunk driving and work with others to eliminate all impaired driving. And we work to empower adults of legal drinking age who choose to drink to do so responsibly. Over the past 30 years, we've made great progress on all three of these missions. We have not done it alone because we all have a seat at the table of responsibility, and responsibility starts with each one of us. Responsibility.org is all about conversations that lead to a lifetime of healthy alcohol choices, but not every conversation is about alcohol. We have a social responsibility as well to be good citizens, good humans, and if we're parents, to raise our kids to be the same. So happy holidays, everybody. The last almost 2 years have been trying, to say the least. Don't get me wrong, there is very much that we should all be grateful for, but it has been a struggle. We're back to travel. Cars are back on the roads. We're back to using Rideshares, and some of us are planning to hit the road for the upcoming Christmas holidays or other winter breaks. So it's back to normal, but it's not normal, and it's not even the new normal. Things are changing every day, even now. So winter travel brings its own challenges. Cold weather, bad road conditions. And so you add in holiday travel, such as Thanksgiving and Hanukkah, which have come and gone, Christmas, New Year's, and everything in between, events, parties, and drivers need to remember it all starts and ends with responsibility. We want the season to be safe and sound. And in order to do that, we need to add in responsibility. We're really excited to bring this holiday webinar series to you. So let's get started. I would like to ask our panelists, who have been generous with their time today and who are going to be very generous with their expertise, to introduce themselves. I will start with you, Rick.
Thanks, Erin. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Rick Birt. I'm the president and CEO of SAD, Students Against Destructive Decisions. In our 40th year, we work with a national network of about 8,000 chapters in middle schools, high schools, and colleges across the country to empower students, engage adult allies and parents, mobilize communities, and change lives, certainly around the issues of impairment. And I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Thanks, Rick. Carol?
Hello, and good morning and good afternoon to some of those. My name is Carol Campa, and I work for the Behavioral Traffic Safety section in the Traffic Safety Division for the Texas Department of Transportation.
Thank you, Carol. Kurt?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kurt Erickson. I head up a nonprofit called the Washington Regional Alcohol Program. That is actually a local 501c3. It's a grantee of the DC, Maryland, and Virginia Highway Safety Offices, and working to combat drunk driving and underage drinking, something that we've done since our formation back 39 years ago in 1982.
Thanks, Kurt. And Brian.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brian Swift, and I'm the national spokesperson for the National Alliance to Stop Impaired Driving. And we work on trying to focus on multi-substance and making sure people stay safe, and happy to be here.
Great. Thank you, Brian. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the floor to the moderator of our webinar, Brandy Axdahl. Brandy is the Senior Vice President of Responsibility Initiatives for Responsibility.org. I know Brandy not only as an expert in government affairs and impaired driving prevention, but also as a cool mom, a terrific colleague, and just a real superb person. So we are honored to have her. We're honored to have all of you, all of our panelists, and of course, we're honored to have all of you attendees here today. Brandy?
Thank you so much, Erin, and I'm really pleased to be on this webinar today and moderating it with some of my favorite people in traffic safety. So we'll dive right in, and let's start off with what's probably at the top of all of our minds, which is we've seen some data throughout the year, really, but most recently some data that shows what the roads looked like in terms of traffic deaths for the first few months of 2021. I think we were all disappointed in what we saw, and I'd like to invite all of you to comment on what's going on in your area and in your state with traffic deaths and impaired driving on the roads. So maybe we could start with Kurt.
Well, I think it's worth revisiting what the data is. I think you couched it absolutely perfectly, saying that it's disappointing. Who would have thought that in the COVID era that we would have this tremendous and really tragic upticks in both traffic fatalities overall, but alcohol related and impaired driving traffic fatalities specifically. The two batches of data that have come out from NHTSA in recent months, one has been the 2020 estimate. So they haven't released their 2020 data yet. So their 2020 estimates talked about that vehicle miles traveled were down, and they were down significantly. They were down over 13%. You would think that traffic fatalities would be somewhat in tandem with that, but it went the other way. It went against the grain, and traffic fatalities went up over 7%. Alcohol-related traffic fatalities are estimated to go up over 9%. So alcohol-related fatalities are outpacing general fatalities. The other batch of data that NHTSA released in the last couple of months is its first half look at 2021. So the first year that we're in, still very much the COVID era, and unfortunately still serving as an arc of those trends, where it showed that fatalities weren't just up. Again, in 2020, they were showing up 7%. The first half of this year, they were up over 18%, the largest 6-month increase in such deaths ever recorded by NHTSA. In fact, the new Transportation Secretary, Pete Buttigieg, actually called it a crisis. So that's where we're at. I'll close with this. I don't think anybody is immune from these numbers, even if your numbers aren't tracking the same way. I'm in Virginia. If you look at Virginia's number during the COVID era for 2020, traffic fatalities went up. They went up for 2%, but drunk driving fatalities actually outpaced those and went up over 3%. So clearly there's a lot of work to do.
And Carol, if I can call on you too, I know Texas actually tracks how long it's been since they had a day without a fatality on the roadways. Do you want to talk a little bit about what's been going on in Texas?
Yes, and thank you, Brandy, for the opportunity. So yes, this November 7th, Texas marked 21 years of daily death on our roadways, with more than 75,000 innocent lives that were lost to preventable fatal crashes. So for the past several years, we had about 10 people have died in crashes in our state. And of course, this past year, it reached up to 11 per day. So one of the things for us is, our Texas Transportation Commission set a goal to reduce traffic fatalities by 50% in 2035 and 0 by 2050. So while this goal is ambitious, it is far from impossible. Most crashes and fatalities are preventable and caused by things such as speeding, impaired driving, and distracted driving, or simple risky behaviors, not wearing your seatbelt. So that's why the approach to reaching 0 deaths must be done. We do it through the 3 E's, which are the engineering and education and enforcement. So we call on every Texan to do their part to reach their goal of 0. That way, everyone has a responsibility to keep our roads and fellow drivers safe.
Thanks, Carol. Rick, I don't want to put you on the spot. We were talking about impaired driving a lot, but I'm wondering if you can shed some light on how teen driving deaths have gone up or down as we've seen the other issues of impaired driving and speeding go way, way up. Can you speak to what teen drivers have been like during the pandemic?
Yeah, it's an interesting phenomena, and I think Kurt and the secretary correctly labeled this as a crisis. The watchword of all of our lives for the past few years has been public health, and I think the challenge first and foremost is to all of us in the mobility safety community to help elevate this subject to the same criteria as what we've heard other public health crises are, because that's exactly what it is. From a teen perspective, one of the best ways and one of the most data-driven approaches to helping a teen gain knowledge and experiences to just put them behind the wheel and coach them, use driver's ed and other countermeasures to help them gain that experience, which we know is one of the most critical factors in reducing crashes over time. And unfortunately, they've been robbed of that opportunity because we haven't been driving. Mom, dad, other caring adult, maybe going to the store, maybe running that errand, maybe driving them to this event or that event, but there's not been as much experience behind the wheel. And so that's certainly a crisis. Combine that with the fact that our nation, as the Attorney General called it yesterday, is facing a youth mental health crisis, where 1 in 4 high school students is currently struggling with a diagnosable mental health condition. You can see how we are quickly building these factors where teens are feeling alone, they're more prone to make reckless decisions. They're often more likely to turn to substances like impairing substances and then get behind the wheel. So we certainly have our work cut out for us and have a lot of challenges to face as we look to 2022 to reverse the ground we've lost in the last 2 years.
We certainly do. In fact, I think it's the highest number of traffic deaths we've seen on the roadways since 2008, if I'm right about that. And so that's just crazy to think that we've lost more than a decade of progress over the last couple of years. Brian, I know that one of the studies that NHTSA released earlier in the year looked at trauma data in 6 different trauma centers on the East Coast. And sadly, I think what we saw there was that about 1 in 4 people who came in with a serious injury or a fatality was, I think, having more than one substance in their system. So Kurt talked a little bit about alcohol. I know we don't have as much data on other substances, but what have you seen? What have you experienced?
Yeah, when I grew up, it was mainly about drinking and driving, and not that that is not a problem. It truly is. But now with everything that's available, states that are going to legalize marijuana and those sorts of things, we see the mixing, which of course is what we are focused on, multi-substance impairment. And my day job happens to be working for physicians, and I can attest that I talk with my emergency physicians all the time, and they do see the carnage that comes into the emergency rooms. And it is most of the people that come in have multi-substance, whether it's marijuana, whether it's alcohol, they mix. And I mean, I think, in fact, some of the younger people I talk to think that marijuana, for example, makes them less impaired if they smoke it. Another problem that we're seeing is that some of the younger people, they might ingest an edible, they get on the road, it doesn't hit them for an hour or so, and then all of a sudden they're on the road. And it puts everybody in a just horrible position, not only themselves, but of course, other people on the road. And so it's a real problem. I think everybody really summed it up when they said this truly is a public health crisis and we have to address it. That's what I'd say about it.
Hey, Brandy, can I add one thing? Because Rick hit a note and I want to underscore it very aptly. He talked about some of the mental health issues. And there was a great article this week in the LA Times that I think many of you have read and some of us have been quoted in. Talking about really, I'm going to use the term a COVID psyche, but what they were talking about specifically was during this era of lockdowns and so forth, that there's been, quote, what they say is isolation, loneliness, and depression that's really serving as a precursor to some of this very risk-taking, dangerous driving. It's a good read, but I don't think, that's somewhat the elephant in the room. I think we need to acknowledge that.
Thanks, Kurt. I know that there's a question that has been posed in the chat box here, and we will handle questions towards the end. But definitely want to encourage people to visit our virtual bar on the responsibility.org website, where you can key in what you plan to drink and how fast you plan to drink it, and whether it's, you know, a craft beverage of some sort. It takes into account the different drinks, and it can be a good educational tool to help you understand how alcohol affects your BAC. And I think the point was made also that, you know, when you're combining substances, it is not the same sort of, you know, one drink equals X BAC. When you're adding other substances to the mix, the crash risk it has a multiplicative effect. Erin, we can go to the next slide, I think. So what do you think caused all of this? I know, Kurt, we will be together tomorrow in person, finally, for your law enforcement awards ceremony that you do each year. We've done that virtually in the last couple of years. It'll be nice to be together to celebrate the law enforcement officers in the DC area that work so hard to take impaired drivers off the road. But do you think that law enforcement and some of the challenges they faced, specifically at the beginning of COVID and having to, you know, protect against catching the coronavirus, do you think that had any impact here?
Oh, without question. I mean, it's you know, when you talk about impaired driving, you try to find as many solutions as you can, and you try to find as much sticks to the wall. And people have talked about automated enforcement. That's a really tough one. When you can do that for red light running, you can do that for speed cameras. Impaired driving, it's a little bit of a different animal. So when you're having less engagement with the public because of a pandemic, understandably, that's going to result in different numbers. But one of the other things that's noted about law enforcement is they're not fully staffed. They are dedicated to this issue, and we're going to be recognizing law enforcement from around the Beltway tomorrow for serving as the front lines in the fight against drunk driving. But when their staffing is down, in Virginia, it's estimated anywhere between 15 and 25% down in terms of staffing. This can have a significant ripple effect. I mean, the reason that people drive dangerously is because they can. And the fact of the matter is that if they're not seeing law enforcement, or they're not hearing about their friends and colleagues and peers getting arrested for their dangerous driving, it only is going to compound matters.
I think we saw that too with speed. Carol, Rick, Brian, you guys, have you seen speed accompanying the problem along with impaired driving?
Yes, absolutely. You know, as you mentioned, Kurt, that, you know, not having a vehicle out on the roadway to deter people from, you know, it could be from impaired driving, but also from the speeders, and people are not wearing seatbelts and other traffic violations. So high visibility law enforcement is crucial to deter those risky behaviors. You know, just the lack of law enforcement being present in the roadways, I believe, was a really big, was a contributing factor to those crashes and fatalities increasing. You know, we all know that people tend to slow down and buckle up when they see a police vehicle stationed there by the side of the roadway. You know, we typically go by there and go like, oh, I'm glad that wasn't me. But, you know, definitely not having law enforcement present really was a real big issue for Texas as well.
Yeah, I would just say, I think as we know, when, and again, I refer to, again, many people I talk to that are having multi-substance problems and are on the roads, they're just more risk averse, right? And so it would naturally track that when you're in your car, not only are you distracted with a bunch of different things, if you are taking, you know, drugs, or you're drinking, whatever, it just makes you freer, I guess. And again, it causes these sorts of issues, which are just catastrophic. And so it's dangerous.
Yeah, Brandy, I would just add from a youth perspective, I think so oftentimes we think about law enforcement as the first line of defense. They should really be our last line of defense. And I think by tackling and investing in prevention programs, we've released with the Ford Motor Company a program called Speak Up, Slow Down. That certainly speaks to the power of talking to young people about their voice to speak up in any situation, whether it's with the driver who is driving recklessly or a driver who is impaired, to get themselves out of that situation. And I know we'll talk about that later on, but to also realize that our daily lives changed throughout the COVID pandemic. How and when we drank and what we drank and to what quantity we consumed alcohol also changed. And so I think expecting us to go back to business as usual in prevention and particularly in roadway safety is misguided. And we have to instead think about where people are and the trauma that we've gone through, the challenges that we're facing in mental health, the need to address substance abuse disorders. All of those factors are things I think we have to wrestle with in a way that we've not previously thought about in talking about roadway safety.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rick. When we launched our Wrong Side of the Road program in November, which really is a public education campaign that helps people understand from a justice-involved individual standpoint, somebody who's had a DUI arrest, what that process was like and trying to reach that risky driving audience with that message. When we did launch that, we looked at some public opinion research, and what we found was that people feel like they know a lot about preventing impaired driving. They feel like they know what they need to do. But interestingly, they didn't talk to other people about it almost at all. So I know, Rick, you mentioned your program to talk to others, but I think that's another thing that maybe we're not doing enough of, is really being ambassadors, for safety. Just not just us, but just the daily driver, and not being afraid to talk about it with other people and really carrying that message forward about how many other options there are to driving impaired. You don't have to do that. You can't do that. So that'll be interesting to really amplify that message moving forward too.
Yeah. Let's
go to the next slide, Erin. So as we move further into the holiday season, it's getting cold. Today it feels even colder than it is. I think we had a few snowflakes yesterday. I know I'm about to travel across the country for the holiday season. So I'm just thinking, what are some of the tips there? And I think I'd love to start with Carol here, who I know probably is tasked with really making sure Texans get out and drive safely. What are the kinds of things that you would advise people to do and be careful of as they start maybe some long distance travel?
So one of the things that I think is really important is for people to make sure that their car is in good shape to drive the distance. We have to make sure, one of the things that you have to also be sure of is to know your route and plan it out. You could do things like leave earlier or later to avoid the heaviest traffic. But also, check your weather forecast before you hit the road and visit. We have a website called Drive Texas where people can check the highway conditions and notices for any road closures that are maybe due to hazardous weather, such as flooding or ice or snow. But the other thing too, I would always say, is to always remember to drive a safe speed for traffic, weather and road conditions. Always buckle up, drivers and all riders, day and night. Put your phone away and focus 100% on your driving. And of course, never drive under the influence of alcohol or other drugs.
One thing that comes to mind, and Kurt, maybe you can speak up here. One of the things that we appreciate the most at responsibility.org is the efforts of our law enforcement. And this is a particular time of year where they're busier. People are driving more and driving unsafely traditionally more often. But it's a dangerous place for them to be on the roads. And I know, we're all thinking of locally in DC, we're thinking of Rich Leotta and his family. And we know all too well how Noah Leotta, his son, was killed while enforcing a traffic stop and enforcing impaired driving laws. Any advice for people as they see emergency vehicles on the roadways, what they should do there?
Well, first of all, I'd say let's make sure everybody understands the numbers. So at any time during the year, according to NHTSA, 28% of all traffic deaths in this country, unfortunately, still involve impaired drivers. Those numbers really crank up when you start talking about the winter holidays. When you talk about New Year's Eve, New Year's Day specifically, it's 36%. When you talk about Christmas Day, it's 38%. So nearly 40% of all traffic deaths in this country during the winter holidays, involve 100% preventable fatalities, that being involvement of drunk drivers. One of the things that I think people can do, because I want to make sure that our messaging doesn't fall on deaf ears. Somebody might be listening and going, hey, look, I have every confidence in the world. I'm not going to drive impaired. Unfortunately, that confidence doesn't convey to the other driver. So one of the things you can do, and I so appreciate the message about buckling up, because it's the single most effective measure to reduce crash-related deaths and injuries, but it's reporting drunk drivers. If you can safely report drunk drivers, that means safely pulling over, calling law enforcement, usually 911, but check with your own locality to be that extra set of eyes. If law enforcement is already skeletal in terms of their staffing, and they're not doing as much high visibility enforcement, that extra set of eyes and that extra reporting, and as much as people think something's not going to come out of that, I can tell you more often than not, we hear incidents where people are arrested. It's not an easy thing to do. You've got to get a call, you've got to process it, you got to relay it. But one of the stories with U.S. Park Police here in the greater Washington area on GW Parkway was them getting a call of a suspected impaired driver, arresting the woman who was at over a 0.40 for drunk driving. I mean, just a lethal limit. And that's a very unforgiving road with having trees very close by and only 2 lanes of travel in either direction. So buckling up and reporting DUI.
Rick, Brian, anything to add on this particular topic?
I would just say, being from Upper Michigan, where there is snow on the roads constantly, the key is to slow down, right? I remember many times driving on the road and it doesn't look like there's snow on the road. They call it black ice. And so you just go sliding through intersections and red lights. So I think really making sure that your speed, just get there safely, right? I mean, an extra 20 minutes, a half hour in the scheme of life. It's better to be late. It's better to slow down, because I'll tell you what, living in the UP and dealing with snow all the time, people expect it. So please slow down. I think that's really a key during the holidays and during the winter months.
Yeah, Brian, I think that's spot on. I also want to highlight the importance of expectations, particularly when we're talking to young people and setting a clear expectation as a family, as a social group, even for adults. The holidays bring about, again, different settings where we're consuming alcohol, different settings where we're socializing, holiday work parties. And so I don't think it's ever wrong. I don't think it can ever be overstated, the importance of beginning with the end in mind. One of the reasons why people say they drive impaired is they didn't make a plan. They didn't feel like they had other options. We live in a world that's full of options. Even if you're in rural North Dakota or downtown LA, there are other options of calling a friend. And so I think it's about, no matter your age, making sure you have a plan B. If the social dynamic changes and you do find yourself consuming alcohol, making sure you've got a plan, and we as a culture set the expectation that when you are impaired, you execute that plan.
That's a really good point. It is so important to have the plan and to make the plan before you go out, because if you go out and you're consuming alcohol, your judgment isn't going to be as good as it was earlier in the evening. Right. So just plan ahead. That's really sound advice. Aaron, let's go to the next slide and see what we were talking about next. Okay, so what are some traffic safety rules of the road when you're just staying in town? Heading out for a party, dinner, an event, and let's kind of focus on rural and urban, because I think it's a real different set of rules for rural and urban, possibly. There may be different options available there. Maybe we can start with urban and maybe look at Kurt and Carol, and then maybe talk to Rick and Brian about rural people, advice for people in rural areas.
Well, I mean, for urban areas or where there is rideshare, I mean, one of the things, so we run a program through our Virginia partner, Virginia Highway Safety Office called Checkpoint Strike Force. And we annually survey 21, 35-year-old male drivers, which is the target audience of all of us looking to combat drunk driving for perhaps obvious reasons. That group is, I think it's 94% believe it's very important to make a plan before they go out drinking. That's great. That's a really high number. I'm delighted with that. But less than 2/3 regularly do. And so they find it important, but they're not necessarily executing that. And as Rick said, it's closing the loop. It's not getting in a situation where you drove somewhere and then you've got to decide how to get home besides driving. It's perhaps executing that plan to use a rideshare or public transportation or what have you, simply to get there, so that you're closing the loop. That's your loop going back. And that's one thing I'll close with is, it's not just about rideshare and taxi cab companies and designating sober drivers. It's also public transportation. Public transportation can be absolutely instrumental here. And when they're feeling the pinch because of COVID or just economic squeezed overall, and they're limiting their hours, that's closing a door to a route that people might otherwise use to get home safely. And that's why we all need to be advocates for public transportation as a means for would-be celebrants to safely get home.
I think that's a great point, Kurt. Carol, do you have anything to add? I know you come from a state that's so large, it has a little bit of everything: rural, urban, suburban, everything going on in Texas.
Yeah. Thank you. So, kind of like we've all touched upon it is, we're right now, it's the most wonderful time of the year, but one regrettable decision to drink and drive could bring a devastating end to your holiday celebrations. And Kurt touched upon the rideshare program. So, we know that drinking and driving is 100% preventable, but it can have serious physical, emotional, and financial consequences that can last for years. A DWI can be expensive. It can cause legal hassles, difficulty finding or keeping a job, and it can also cause loss of trust from loved ones and regret. So drinking and driving can devastate the lives of victims and survivors forever. So with here in Texas, we have our TxDOT statewide impaired driving campaign. It's called Drive Sober, No Regret, and it aims to save lives and reduce the number of crashes and fatalities. And our campaign has different creative, and it changes throughout the year to match the different key timeframes when it's important to have an impaired driving message when it's most critical. So for example, during the fall football season, we know fall football is a time-honored tradition here in our state, and our goals and objectives are to reduce the number of alcohol or drug-related vehicle crashes and fatalities in Texas during the football season. So college football sports fans in Texas are males between the ages of 18 and 24 years old. Therefore, whether they are tailgating with friends and family or celebrating their team's big win, we want everyone to enjoy the season responsibly. Which is why we partnered with GHSA and responsibility.org. And we received $25,000 to provide $15 Lyft rideshare coupons to get a sober ride home. This is equal to the amount of 1,667 coupons. And these coupons were distributed through outreach events that were held at 4 different colleges, a game day event at a popular sports bar in the DFW area, and the Consequence Spinner at SoberRides.org website. And we will actually continue to give away the remaining Lyft coupons through the month of December by playing that Consequence Spinner on our website. So for the holiday season, our TxDOT Drive Sober No Regrets campaign will host events across the state featuring video testimonials of Texans who deal with the daily consequences of drunk driving, either as an offender or survivor. This multi-layered campaign meets the target audience where they're most likely to consume and retain campaign messaging, which includes social media, YouTube, Pandora radio, billboards, dating apps, posting, and other printed material. In addition, there will be high visibility law enforcement presence during the holiday season through grant funding by TxDOT's Selective Traffic Enforcement Program. And I just kind of wanted to put a plug in. Also, GHSA recently announced that in partnership with Uber, 5 states are being awarded funding for rideshare coupons. So those states are Colorado, Connecticut, Maryland, New Mexico, and Texas. So more information of this effort in Texas will be shared soon. So whether it's an office party with coworkers or a holiday dinner with family and friends, Axdahl wants to remind Texans to always find a sober ride home. And we can definitely do that by using rideshare programs.
Great. And we'll talk a little bit more about rideshare in a little bit. But before we turn to that, we actually had, I think, a really, really good question posed that seems to fit in well here. Rick, you told me I could call on you for anything, so here I go.
Here we go.
What are some good tips to raise awareness for people who are hosting parties to make sure that they don't serve to people underage, and also not just underage, but to people who are already intoxicated? That's a really important point. If you're hosting a party, what do you do?
Yeah, again, I think it goes back to a word I said a moment ago, and that's expectations. You know, we need to have expectations of ourselves that when we are hosting and we're convening people together, that we establish that group norm of how we're going to handle consumption. We're going to make sure that everyone consumes responsibly. We're going to make sure that there are plans in place for people to get home. When we're talking about social hosting laws and, you know, handling the conversation around the holidays around alcohol. Alcohol is part of many time-honored traditions and families. And so I think it's a really unique opportunity for parents and teens and other caring adults to have a conversation about responsibility and what it means to consume and the role that alcohol can play in your life, not as a subject of taboo or of fear, but of one of culture and one of history and one of tradition. And so on our website, www.sad.org, we have lots of great talking points and resources for how to navigate that conversation, particularly something that we call the contract for life, which gives teens and parents a shared sense of mutual understanding, respect, and expectation in how you handle alcohol in social settings. If a teen is ever in a situation where they don't feel safe and they don't feel prepared, you can create an exit word or a strategy word. And even having conversations about making sure when you're out with friends, your phone is fully charged, that you know who you're going to be with, you know where your teen is going to be going, and you know what the expectation of other people in your neighborhood or your social setting is around how they have conversations with their teens around alcohol, so that you're setting your teen up for a good setting to have those conversations. All those things and more are really important.
That's really, really great advice. Brian, before we move on to the next topic, do you have anything you would like to contribute to this particular question?
Yeah, I would say that all of us that are on this call has been greatly affected by others who have made a really bad decision. I, again, am going to be without my parents this holiday season because somebody chose to get in a vehicle while impaired. And I won't have my parents, as I said, this holiday season. So I would say, don't be ashamed. Don't be afraid to be aggressive. I know living again in Upper Michigan, it's okay to say, look, why don't you stay over the night? You can throw a pillow on the floor, for God's sakes. Take their keys. Do not allow them to argue about getting in a vehicle and driving impaired, especially in rural America, right? We have to travel great distances. It's okay. Sleep on the floor. Take the keys. We want to wake up in the morning with everybody intact. And so I would just say, don't be afraid to take the keys and be aggressive and have a sleepover. My God, these are simple things. We did it all the time in rural America, and we can do that.
Now, it's good advice. And, you know, it's so important to take care of each other. It's not just our own actions. We have the ability to really impact the actions of others. Let's go to the next slide, which I think is maybe the rideshare slide. So I am so proud to live in a community that has had an incredible rideshare program for 30 years, Kurt.
Yep.
Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the work you've done in this space?
Yep, if Aaron can put up either of our images, but that last call, last call, felt like a radio show. The last person that had a message about what people can do. Just one last closing thing. I think most of our organizations probably have tips on our website or that we release annually for the holidays. But I think a non-traditional one is worth mentioning, which is you hear a lot about designating a sober driver. I've always been recommending designating a sober bartender, which is to have a person that's in charge that doesn't let guests mix their own drinks, and it's just an additional safety valve. So on the two images that you have up there, the one that on the top one is, again, the program that we do with the Virginia Highway Safety Office. It's called Checkpoint Strike Force. It's in its 20th year. The last 3 years have been a pretty continuous arc of a message, which is that if you're old enough to drink, to act like it, to plan ahead, to plan your exit strategy, be those 94% of people that find it important, but be more than the people that actually execute that plan. So actually have an exit strategy before they go out. And we've got a number of creative that we have, including the TV and again, reaching these 21, 35-year-olds. The Sober Right program is what Brandy had mentioned, and very kindly, which is for the last 30 years. We do a number of prevention programs in various schools, workplaces, and so forth. But at the end of the day, during these high risk, high alcohol consumption periods, you have to have some type of safety valve. And that safety valve for us is a free rideshare service or a free safe ride service that we've done for 30 years, of which over 81,000 people have taken advantage of. We do it on various holidays for perhaps obvious reasons. St. Patrick's Day, Cinco de Mayo, July 4th, Independence Day, Halloween, and then the winter holidays, which will be starting a week from tomorrow for 15 consecutive nights. We had to take a little bit of a back step with COVID, but I can tell you that our ridership, as an example, for Halloween just last month or 2 months ago, we had almost 800 people utilize this program in 6 hours. So it translates into the removal of a would-be drunk driver off of DC area roadways every 27 seconds. So it's basically like a setup. Tell me that people are interested in getting their drink on after this COVID without telling me that people are willing to get their drink on. And the evidence of that is the nearly 800 people that utilize this service over simply a 6-hour period.
Such a great program. And Carol, you had mentioned the effort ongoing in Texas and also the larger effort with Uber and Governor's Highway Safety Association. We're excited to be supportive of that effort as well. And rideshare is really, I think for a long time, we felt like the common sense says it's going to be a huge contribution to preventing impaired driving. And I know earlier this year in the Journal of American Medicine, it was actually proven that Uber, when they entered, I believe it was Houston, maybe, they saw a 34% drop. So it's really promising, and I'm glad to see some studies coming out on that. But there are many rideshare programs across the nation. I know Minnesota has Safe Cab. It's been in place for a long time. The Wisconsin Tavern League has one in Wisconsin. So not every community has one. I wish every community did. But for those who do, it's a great option. All right, Aaron, what's up next here? All right, so what can we expect in the future when it comes to regulations or other ways to keep drivers safe? I'll just kick off this conversation with, we were very supportive of the passage of the HALT and RIDE Act in the most recent transportation bill, the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And we're very hopeful that one day there will be a car that will prevent an impaired driver from driving. And so while we are dedicated to that, we also know that with fleet turnover, we're talking about decades. So what do you see on the horizon in terms of what we can do to really reverse this trend and move us in the right direction again in a meaningful way? And I can call on someone first, maybe Brian.
Well, I would say that one of the things we are focused on, there are new technologies, right, that are always going to be coming online. One of the things we focused on is oral fluid testing. So I think it's really important to identify those people that are impaired and get them off the roads, right, before they not only hurt themselves, but kill somebody that you love. And it can happen to you. I know it's really hard. There are a lot of people out there that think, gee, it happened to somebody else. And believe me, your life can change in the drop of a hat. And so I think that is what I see is the future data collection technology, model programs around the country that really can shine a light. And I think we mentioned this early on, this truly is a public health crisis. And so we've got to focus on that. And I know we can all do it together with things, again, like low fluid testing at the roadside.
That's a really promising new strategy to identify whether some further testing needs to be done for something beyond alcohol. It's a really good one. Kurt, do you have any thoughts on what should be a focus next year and in years to come?
I mean, if I had to simplify it, I would say, a doubling down of what we know works. So, and one of those things is high visibility enforcement and maybe sobriety checkpoints specifically. It's an excellent tool to identify and apprehend drunk drivers and can reduce traffic fatalities by as much as 20%. It's actually not my opinion. It's actually indicative of a study done by the Insurance Institute that looked at the efficacy of these type of law enforcement operations. And like you said, Brandy, the embrace of technology. I mean, at the end of the day here, technology is going to win this fight. So whether it is passive alcohol sensors, as we've seen announced at the federal level and has been signed into law, or even just administratively in Virginia just yesterday with commercial operators, as that's going to be standardized there with a pilot program. But it's also use of existing technology and the greater use of it, including ignition airlocks, as a means that once you have people on this, or to create a larger universe of people that are on it, as you and I know in Maryland, as an example, you can get a DUI, but it's more often than not a probation before judgment, a diversion program that you're not getting the, more than a slap on the wrist. But yet, if we made this a condition of probation and we had more people under this proven effective technology, I think the less drunk driving carnage we'd see on our roadways.
I couldn't agree with you more, Kurt. And, everything says that swift and certain punishment is what is most important. And there's not usually anything swift or certain about punishment for drunk drivers. Carol, what are your thoughts on future actions that need to be taken?
Well, I think everybody has mentioned some really great things. We and talk about technology. We know that the automated vehicles are actually, they already have some even semis that are actually driving in our roadways here in Texas, that they're actually testing to be driverless type of thing. I mean, they still have a driver in there, but it is a real thing. And even though we may be a few years away from actually implementing that, that is coming in the future. So we know that's something that is viable. But I think it's, one of the things that I also mentioned was doubling down what works, and the keeping up with the engineering and education and enforcement is going to continue to be a big part. I think that one of the things that happened during the pandemic is that we didn't have the opportunity to tell our story, to keep the traffic safety message in front of us, because we were so, and rightly so, inundated with messages about COVID and the pandemic and being safe and staying at home. But we had an actual captured audience that we could have provided this traffic safety message, because at the time, even though nobody was driving, it was just a way to bring those messages across. So again, just continuing to provide that education and continue to encourage people to do the right thing, and just making sure that everybody is taking responsibility for their own actions.
Rick, I'm going to do this again to you. I have a nephew who learned to drive during COVID. He learned online, and he's been driving with his parents. But what's it like out there for SAD? What are you guys focusing on for the next couple of years? What's your priority?
Yeah, so the future is the watchword, right? It's a good news, bad news situation. And just like everyone said, the future is bright with lots of technology out there. The bad news is hundreds of thousands of people are going to die while we're waiting on the future to get here. And so for us, when we're talking about so oftentimes that 21 to 35 demographic, we think that we've missed the boat when we're trying to target that age group. So we try to start younger, starting normalizing these conversations around alcohol and responsibility, around being a person who speaks up and watches out for your friends and your family when you're in middle school, when you're in high school, certainly when you're in college. And especially for parents, understanding that as your teen leaves the nest and goes into a new world of new pressures and less accountability, more responsibility, there's an opportunity there to have a new conversation about what responsibility looks like. So as we're at the holidays and everyone's bringing home their dirty laundry from school and back together, it's a renewed moment where families can talk about their expectations and what they want to do around responsibility. And modeling that behavior starts even when your kids are, quite honestly, in diapers. When they're in elementary school, they're watching how you handle alcohol, what your perception is around the risks that you're putting yourself and the family in, and how you mitigate those by being a responsible consumer. So at SAD, we're talking about the things we've been talking about for 40 years, but realizing that we can't sit on our laurels, because in the hour that we've been here, unfortunately, dozens of people have been put in risk, dozens of lives have been lost, and we have to get angry about this and regarner public opinion, get out in the media again, and take away the normalization of this behavior and put a taboo on it like we've done in the past, and we need to continue to do in the future.
That sounds good. I'm going to take just a point of personal privilege and throw my own thought in on something that hasn't been mentioned yet, and that is that we strongly support ignition interlocks, and we believe that everybody who's convicted of a DUI should have them. If possible, while they're awaiting trial, that's something that can be a condition of bond that can be helpful as well. However, we also know that about 25 to 30% of people who were ordered to an interlock actually installed them. So that's a problem. There is a new court model out there coming out of San Joaquin County. And the judge out there, Judge Flavianos, he's been screening everyone who comes into his courtroom and encouraging them to take part in his program. And what that entails is every single repeat offender either goes into a treatment track, which is your traditional DUI court. We know that those work really, really well for repeat offenders who have a substance use disorder or addiction. And then the other track that he moves people into is if they are at a high risk of recidivism, and every repeat offender is, but they do not have the need for treatment, meaning they abuse substances, but they're not addicted. Then they move into what's called a monitoring track. And he's found a way to pretty quickly and efficiently monitor the offenders in his courtroom. So they're either monitored with treatment, that's about 30% of his offenders, or monitored only. And that ensures that they're getting the ignition interlock, they're getting the cognitive behavioral therapy, things that they need to change their behavior. And that's a model that I think has some ways to replicate across the United States. So we're at the part of the webinar where we can answer some questions. I know a few were posed in the box. If you have questions, now's the time to type them in there. I'll lead off with a couple of the questions that have already been posed. The first one that was a while back was by a law enforcement officer who said, should we really be talking about impaired driving instead of just drunk driving, because they're seeing so many instances of multiple substance? My personal opinion is if you're impaired, whether it's by drugs, by alcohol, by distraction, by fatigue, then that's a problem. And that's one thing that we have broadened our focus to focus on multiple substances. But drunk driving is still by far and away the most documented impairing effect. So we will always remain focused on that front. But any thoughts on impaired driving, and are you seeing more instances of multiple substance in your communities?
I know that most of the national data shows that it is poly-use, and it speaks to the issue of testing. So not just the frequency of testing and the deeper bench of testing, but a deeper panel of testing, so we can rule out what are people impaired by, so we can address things accordingly. As was said earlier on this webinar, when people are consuming marijuana and thinking that they're okay to drive, or perhaps even worse, that they're better to drive. That's a really different, technical tack that we're going to take to try to address that issue versus perhaps impaired driving by alcohol. So it's getting more information, again, by testing, but a deeper panel of what they're being impaired by.
Brian, I know you'll have a lot to say on this one.
Yeah, I think that there's no doubt if you talk to any of our toxicologists, they will tell you that they need to do more testing, they need more data collection. And so just picture yourself, you're in a community, somebody comes in, they're dead. And so they test, they might stop at alcohol. And so when you add on the ability to test, you're able to gather more data. And I think none of us on this call will be surprised when we start doing more data collection that we're going to see multi-substance abuse in these people. And so I think it's a matter of data collection. That's what all our toxicology people are saying. We need more data. And so that is something I'm very much focused on, and having sort of continuity from state to state. Everybody is doing it differently. Everybody has different capabilities and capacities. Everybody has to worry about budgets and money. And so we have to have continuity, which is, again, is going to lead to data, which is what we need on this subject.
Sounds good. That's a great answer. One other question that was posed here is about prosecution, and do we need more aggressive prosecution? And I would welcome any comments there, but I just want to say, I think that being a DWI prosecutor is probably one of the hardest jobs out there. It's a really, I've had people from our Judicial Advisory Board tell us that it's harder to prosecute a DWI than it is a murder case because of all of the technical data that they have to master. A lot of times prosecutors are very inexperienced, and we know that many times they're prosecuting up against a defense attorney who might have years and years of experience. So we have worked with the National District Attorneys Association to create an online DUI prosecution course for alcohol. And next year we have one coming out for drugs as well. So hopefully that will be helpful. But any other thoughts on prosecution and that particular subject?
I would just echo your sentiments, Brandy, on being empathetic to the role, but also knowing that there's, linkages between traffic safety resource prosecutors amongst the states that can really work collaboratively together. But as you said, the complexities are, Virginia is always an example that I always heard, which is that the code for homicide in Virginia or manslaughter is 1 page. The code for DUI in Virginia is 40 pages. And that just talks about the very, complexities about the issue and what can be exacerbated or leveraged perhaps in the wrong way by defense.
Yeah, Brandy, I would say the short answer is yes, and that this is an opportunity to invest in more treatment and more prevention, things that, again, can be front-ended to save us $2 on the judicial system and $1 in prevention or treatment could have helped solve the problem, particularly, again, mental health. Talking about the challenges with substance abuse and mental health, I can't say enough in a situation, particularly post-COVID, for us to tackle with.
And I would just add one last point. There are many people that are out there. I think we all recognize that any issue right now has become very contentious. And a lot of people like to couch every issue under social justice mantra. And I would say that DWI expungement has nothing to do with social justice. And this is about personal responsibility, right? And so we have to support our law enforcement, our people out there, and you have to take responsibility for yourself. And expungement is not the answer.
Thank you, Brian. We have a couple of questions about BAC and BAC education. So I think I'll tee off that answer and then we'll cut to the end. So anybody that has any other thoughts, we can quickly wrap up. But I think the question was asked about if you are relying on BAC levels, would it be good to have a single-use breathalyzer to help you make decisions? There was also, I think from the same individual, a question about a 0.05 BAC law. I'm going to quickly chime in and throw it to you guys, and then I think we'll wrap up after that. But I think that the most important message is if you're going to drink, get a different way to get home. You know, I have seen more than ever with the drugs and drug impaired driving. When you add polysubstances to the mix, the BAC limit needs to go out the window. It's no longer applicable with multiple substances in the system. And I mean, I think with drugs, you know, we can see that there's not a level there that shows impairment, and it's just so individual. It's based on age and weight and gender. And so, you know, I guess I would say, I think the most important thing is if you're going to drink alcohol or use any other substances, don't drive. It's a choice that people can make.
I would agree. And I would also add that, you know, wherever we can do BAC education, you're right. If you're going drinking, just find an alternative means of getting home. But you know what, when we drive, we know whether we're going 55 miles an hour, or when we're in the supermarket, we know whether we have 15 items in the express lane, but most people do not know their BAC. And so the more that we can educate them on what that means before they go out, when they're sober and they're receptive to this, that much the better.
Okay, I'm going to take the floor back. You all were tremendous. Thank you, Brandy. And thank you to Kurt and Brian and Rick and Carol. Just absolutely wonderful answers and dialogue. My profession puts me in this position to be with so many people who know so much, but are still able to teach each and every one of us every time we convene. And I appreciate that very, very much. So thank you for your time and expertise. I do want to invite you all to join us in our next session. It's our last session of our holiday webinar series. It's called Comfort and Joy. We are continuing the holiday traditions. We find comfort and joy from so many places. In the last couple of years, we've had so much grief, and it might feel a little bit off to be comfortable and to be joyful, but we do want to find our gratefulness. And we also do want to be mindful that our comfort and joy is not always found in the bottom of a glass, and how we can do that, and the best ways we can, again, be safe, be sound, and have a great holiday season. So again, thank you all so much, and happy holidays.